Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to be analyzing and looking at module 10 and specifically the paper on formalism and Cleanth-Brooks. The content writer of this paper is Dr. Uma Shankar Patra of the Department of English of Delhi University. I am Shashi Khurana and I have been associated with Delhi University, and I would be with you to go through this paper and try to understand some of the concepts and the matter which is part of the paper. I hope we would all be able to understand and enjoy primarily what we are looking at. First and foremost, let's try to understand what formalism is. As you know, the suffix ism refers to theory. So formalism refers to a particular theory, and specifically it refers to the school of literary criticism and theory which originated in the second decade of 20th century in Russia. In many of your other papers you also covered a number of concepts, but here we are being taken into a very specific theory which originated in Russia. Let us look at the way formalism in Russia developed and what are the schools of thought which need to be paid attention to. There are two important schools of Russian formalism. The first is the Moscow Linguistic Circle. This was founded by Roman Jakobson in 1915. The members included in this particular group or circle were Osip Brick and Boris Tomaszewski. All important propounders of the theory of formalism, which we would look at in details as we go on. What is it that the formalists did in comparison to or in contrast to the other theorists? What we need to understand is the way formalists rejected the prevalent socialist, and I quote, socialist view of literature, which emphasized on the historicity of the text. Again, a very important deviation that we need to take note of, that this was a rejection and not something that was developed by creating something new, but it originated from the point of rejection. So, if it originated from the point of rejection, what would be the objectives of formalism? Let us look at it from point to point. I would quote, the subject of literary scholarship is not literature in its totality, but literariness, that is, that which makes a given work a work of literature. Quotes closed. This is a quotation from the work of Roman Jakobson. Let's repeat it. The subject of literary scholarship is not literature in its totality, but literariness. So do try to make a note, keep in mind the difference between the two terms. The literary scholar ought to be concerned solely with the inquiry into the distinguishing features of literary materials. Again, this is a quotation, and now this time this quotation is from Boris Eichenbaum, and the quotation again emphasizes a very important aspect of formalism. Another citation, please make note of it, by Victor Shklovsky, in quotes, art is a way of experiencing the artfulness of object. The object is not important. Once again, maybe we can look at it more carefully. It makes us rethink about our own notions of what art is or what artfulness is. Art is a way of experiencing the artfulness of object. The object is not important. We'll move on now to the other aspects of what the formalists tried to project. The formalists argued that the literariness, the word is in quotes, remember, the literariness of literary works is an effect produced by the use of language in a specific way, different from the ordinary speech. As a result of this understanding of literariness, the knowledge of the devices and strategies of producing such an effect or perception assumed importance. Therefore, the focus shifts. The focus shifts to not so much the object, but what it tries to achieve. Now, a number of examples have been cited, and let us look at the examples. One example, unusual points of view, such as the use of horse as a narrator in Tolstoy. So, the narrator is not a human character, but somebody who's non-human, so becomes a body but non-human. So notice the shift. The other example is that bland narration of an important event in Shame. Now Shame in quotes, the work, the narration, how the narration has been done, the style in which the narration has been done, specifically in Shame. Let us also look at some of the other methods. The various methods of plotting, such as flashbacks and flash forwards, etc. So you would we are familiar with certain flashback methods which we call the stream of consciousness, but the formalists focus on specifically the flashbacks, flash forwards, and of course, as we had already discussed earlier, the kind of a narrative voice that takes over. Now, what is the difference between plot and story? Difference between plot, Josette, and story, Fabula. Plot is the sequence of events that appears in a narrative. And what about a story? Story is the sequence of events outside the narrative time. Note the difference between plot and story, and it is the way the sequence of events are projected within the narrative or outside the narrative. For an example, the story of Heart of Darkness would begin with the life of Kurtz, but the novel, that means the plot, opens with Marlowe, who deliberates on Kurtz's life in flashback. So the way the story and the plot are interspersed, and the way they are interspersed is also a highlight or an example of the differences in the plot and the story. So Heart of Darkness becomes a very appropriate example. Let us look at some other devices used by the artists. Artists use acts of defamiliarization to create a special perception of the world. For example, in quotes, "Thou still unravished bride of quietness," unquote, produces an extraordinary vision of the urn. Of course, the example is from Keats and the image that it creates. So even though the urn as an object is not familiar, but the way it has been described makes it something, adds to the vision, which is an extraordinary vision of the urn. For the formalists, however, these acts through which these literary effects were produced were important. So once again, we look at what becomes more significant for the formalists. The way in which these literary effects were produced on the basis of the examples already given to you. Thanks to such an emphasis, the literary work assumed importance in itself. The message or the meaning of the text was not any more important, but it was the strategies and rhetorical devices which were analyzed. So the meaning of a text could be derived, could emerge and have its own particular or individual effect, but the formalists were concerned more with the rhetorical devices. Once again, we focus on form. Form was not only an envelope but had an independent existence, and it was possible to examine the form. This is precisely what is very new in the history of criticism. Let us look at now specifically Cleanth Brooks. The major works of Cleanth Brooks are The Well-Wrought Urn, Understanding Poetry, and Understanding Fiction. Each of these works focuses on the effects produced or the methodology used, or to put it in another word, in other words, it is the form which takes precedence over the content. Cleanth Brooks argued for a distinction between ordinary speech and poetic language. We are quite familiar with this distinction right from the time of the Romantics, but then again how the formalists or the new school of theorists, they developed certain ideas which had been already worked upon. Ordinary speech denotative, one word for one thing. Scientific and positivist in spirit. These were some of the other aspects of formalism. Poetic language, connotative, that is one word suggesting many meanings. Anti-scientific in spirit. So once again we look at the way the formalists developed and also emphasized on very specific aspects of literature. Another phrase or a term which has been introduced, or a concern that has been introduced by the formalists, is the heresy of paraphrase. According to the formalists, poetic language is not reductive. It encompasses disparate worlds, different ideas which might be contradictory to each other. A summary does not acknowledge the play of contradictory ideas in a poem. So therefore, it is a complete rejection of paraphrase. Perhaps paraphrase is an exercise that we as students and teachers are very familiar with, and we feel that it becomes an important tool for understanding. But please note the rejection of paraphrase. Therefore, paraphrasing of poems needs to be discouraged, as the poetic language does not carry a message, rather embodies a world. Paraphrase method, an exercise that we are so familiar with, that method becomes something which is rejected by the formalists. For example, to analyze Ode on a Grecian Urn. The urn, even though lifeless, captures external life and is a reminder of the vivacity of life in the face of death. Thus, the poem stages the binaries of life and death, art and life, status and dynamic, and works through the literary devices of metaphor, irony, and paradox. So the object itself, which is a Grecian urn, becomes important only by the way it is brought out from that world and the way it depicts another world which surrounds it or which is depicted on it. Let us look at the preface to Lyrical Ballads now. Wordsworth discerns the possibility of the extraordinary in the commonplace and the poetic in the ordinary speech. We remember Wordsworth from what he said, that the speech of the poet should be the speech of the ordinary person. Brooks argues that such use of paradox presents new perspective, a novel view of the world, and hence a sense of wonder. And so once again, the form gets emphasized by Cleanth Brooks, and he highlights that through the examples that he has cited. Brooks provides a close reading of Donne's canonization. He demonstrates the balance creative by contradictory ideas. We already know the emphasis on binary meaning or binary implications, which has been brought out by the new thinkers, the new theorists, and Cleanth Brooks demonstrates that contradiction creates a new idea, or it emphasizes an idea which is being conveyed by the creative writer. Cleanth Brooks argues about the unified harmonious whole created by such use of paradox. Therefore, paradox itself contributes to a complete meaning, even though the ideas used or the statements made are so contradictory. As part of the criticism of Brooks, many later critics found fault with Brooks's unified whole theory. They argued that the poem, with its inherent tension, results in disruption rather than creative a harmonious whole. So this is one of the criticisms that has been made against Brooks's way of understanding and projecting. The new critics were also criticized for the lopsided approach of structural analysis, which did not take into account the historicity of the text. In their favor, it could be argued that they were seeking to further an experimental method of criticism by focusing only on the text, not extra text material. So this needs to be emphasized once again so that we are able to grasp how the new critics were different and what was their concern as compared to the earlier critics. It is really the text which matters and nothing else except for the text. The new critics also taught us the methods of close reading, and close reading in inverted commas from the text of Clay and Brooks, which has informed later schools of thought which eventually went on to criticize them. So close reading becomes not just an exercise but an important method and an important norm or a rule which has been projected by the new critics, and of course one of them who we are studying in detail is Cleon Brooks through his various works. The basic difference as cited by Cleon Brooks and his associates between practical language and poetic language had its origins in the study of Russian linguist Leo Jakubinsky. So this becomes, Leo Jakubinsky becomes an important founder of this difference between, or of citing the importance of the difference between the practical language and poetic language. According to Jakubinsky, practical language is used for means of communication and has no independent value, whereas the poetic language, in quotes, acquires independence, unquote. When we are talking about, or when we are trying to understand the difference between practical and poetic language as propounded by Jakubinsky and supported by the other formalists, let us look at some examples so that we are able to understand this whole concept or this whole approach in a more comprehensible way. For example, a sentence like, and I quote, "You are beautiful," unquote, would communicate certain emotions of feeling, of response, depending on the context and the people involved. Therefore, the sentence "You are beautiful" becomes communicative, evokes certain emotions, and all this depends on the context and the people involved. But a line from a poem, and I quote again, "Oh, my love is like a red, red rose," unquote, does not only communicate but also assumes a certain independent existence for its sound patterns and simile. Now this is what is important. The meaning is the same. You are beautiful. My love is like a red, red rose. What is the difference? Now the use of the literary device simile. So that adds to the poetic quality of this particular sentence. We do not value the line for its contribution to meaning, for its sound, quality and beauty. This, for the formalists, was the key to understand poetic language. For them, form was not only an envelope but had an independent existence, and it was possible to examine the form. Boris Eichenbaum, in his essay, "The Formal Method," argues that form was a complete thing. something concrete, substantive in itself. Now this is important. Again, form has got an independent existence and therefore becomes very significant in the eyes of the formalists. Making a departure from the symbolist who argued that form not only clothes the content, they argued that form itself was content. Again, a very important shift. Form itself becomes content. Therefore, form becomes most predominant. For example, the simile of red rose is imperative to drive home the poet's impression of his lover, and the emphasis arrived by the repetition of the word red suggests the depth of the emotion as well as underlines the beauty of the lover. My love is like a red, red rose. Had the sentence stopped with just one red, perhaps the meaning would have been there, the emotion would have been there, but the extent, the weight of the emotion becomes intensified by the repetition. And it is this form of language which adds or which becomes the content of the particular poem. The exaggeration is fitting as the poem ends on a note of melodrama by the use of exaggeration in the phrase, and I quote, 10,000 mile. So the exaggeration itself adds to the form. The use of red twice also allows the possibility of the ballad meter which bestows the poem with lyrical qualities. So the sound, the language creates a certain sound, a certain pattern, which also in a way takes a particular piece of writing into another genre. So a poem, is more like a ballad when such devices have been used. These are the two basic forms of operation in language. Similarity, metaphor, and association, metonymy. Though both of them are always in operation, yet cultural and social factors of certain eras favor one over the other. He cites the example of primacy of metaphor and symbolism in the Romantic age. He applies these two categories to poetry and prose and stipulates the general poetry is influenced by metaphoric exercises as evident in the similarity of meter in lines, use of similar or contrasting words, and semantic parallelism. According to Brooks, however, prose works through metonymic explorations. He gives the examples of, the quotation is, hair on the upper lip, bare shoulders, as in War and Peace, that suggests masculinity of the characters and nudity by terms of association. So Cleant Brooks elaborates on the importance of form of language and how it is used differently in poetry as well as in prose. Insistence on the general nature of language at work and focus on strategies of literariness like defamiliarization resulted in the deliberation on the mechanism of works of art in general. Vladimir Propp, in Morphology of Folk Tales, examined the folk tales to find out 7 kinds of tropes in operation. Bakhtin argued for a theory of novel by delving into the generic convention, style, and close examination of language. So as we can make out that the emphasis is on close examination of or close reading, as has already been cited earlier. Some of these works provide fertile grounds for new perspectives on genres and literary history. Roman Jakobson's categories of synchronic and diachronic informed formalist debates on literary history and criticism. According to Jakobson, synchronic analysis examines various elements of literary tradition at a given point of time, whereas the diachronic description takes into account the changes in a given tradition. And the given traditions that have occurred over a period of time. For example, a synchronic analysis of Dickens' use of Bildungsroman focuses on his novels like David Copperfield, Great Expectations, etc. In a diachronic examination, history of the Bildungsroman genre is traced and its various shifts over the centuries are outlined, with Dickens occupying one of the key nodes of this tradition. Therefore, once again, it becomes important to look at the way it's not only poetry but even prose which has been examined. What the formalists have underlined with these interventions was that it was possible to construct a history of literary forms, thereby writing a history of literature free from history. Now that's again very important. Writing of history of literature which is free from history. This break from history was complete, accomplished by the formalists. In this way, the different literary traditions could be imagined, and it anticipates theorists of tradition such as Eliot, Pound and Lewis. The literary history was to take into account the formulation of new genres and themes, rather than focusing on the biography of the writer. As a result of this kind of literary history, many forgotten writers and works were to find their place, resulting in the revision of tradition. Very important. So look at the seminal intervention that was made by the formalists because of their approach or their understanding of how to read a particular text. A classic example of this is Eliot's revival of the metaphysical poets. A point to be noted is that metaphysical poets in their own time were hardly known or recognized. It was only when Eliot looked at their style of writing, the argumentative style, the yoking of contradictions, that made the metaphysicals very prominent, and their contribution to poetry as something which was very, very significant. As evident vis-a-vis the above instances, that is the metaphysical poetry, the formalists had two major objectives. First, to describe the general characteristics of literariness, and secondly, a closer analysis of specific literary tropes and strategies. The formalists were seeking to understand the general nature of literature and literary devices, as well as the historical evolution of literary techniques. Their structural analysis model was followed closely by another school of thought, New Criticism, which appeared in the Anglo-American world in the 1950s and the 1960s. We have just been through a very interesting analysis of Cleanth Brooks' contribution to understanding literature. We looked at specifically the formalist school of thought and the formalist criticism and theory which emerged in Russia, picked up by various other critics, and how this development or this perspective through the theory of formalism helped to analyze literature from different perspectives. We discovered that what is important is not so much the content. What is important is the way the content has been presented. We also looked at and came to know the differences between plot and story through various examples, right from the Romantics through the poets of other periods up to the metaphysical poets, going back to the metaphysical poets, and also touching upon many of the novelists of the 19th century. Thank you for visiting the EPG Pathshala. If you have any further queries regarding this particular lesson, do get in touch with us.